Whether at home or work, life is about relationships. Welcome to Small Change, Big Dividends with your host, Branch Isole. Small Change, Big Dividends shares steps, tools, and tips for personal career and spiritual growth. So please welcome the host of Small Change, Big Dividends, Branch Isole.
When I was in high school, there were some who were not avid readers. I was one of those. So I used Cliff Notes, abridged editions of the books that we were required to read for English class. These short synopsis texts were perfect for last-minute brush-up if one had not read or finished a book and the final exam was upcoming. These synopses were known as Cliff's Notes. In fact, their use was so prolific, by the time I graduated from high school, I had only read 2 novels completely. I've since made up for that, but at that time, it was a way to get the important points needed to understand the author's story and intent. Today, I'm going to share a Cliff's Notes version of acquiring spiritual grounding and using spiritual strength. For those who may not have been studying as much or have been too busy for the upcoming final exam. If this is you, stay tuned. Coming to you from deep in the forest near the banks of the Ouachita River, you're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Small Changes, Big Dividend is a show where your questions are part of the program. So if you have a question, you can call during the live show to our toll-free number, 1-866-451-1451. Or you can send your question anytime during the week to my website, branchisole.com. Thanks for joining me again today. Each week, I share Mana'o with listeners from around the world. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we talk about personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. Today, I'm going to share some small changes that can pay big dividends in your relationships and in your life. Because whether at home or work, life is about relationships, but it's healthy relationships that encourage and embrace growth. When I was in the Army, my unit was responsible for guarding the ammunition storage bunkers on our base. This required 12 soldiers for 24 hours to guard 1 entry gate and 3 towers. Each shift was 2 hours on, 4 hours off. So sleep amounted to 4 hours or less at any given time, before we each went back to one of those 4 posts. Now the benefit or reward was you got 2 days off from your regular work assignment for every day that you were on ammo dump duty. Now no one liked this duty because it messed with your daily routine, and no one ever volunteered, except you know who. I would volunteer every time the company needed. Why? Because each week I could pull 2 24-hour shifts and have the rest of the week off. Now granted, my sleep schedule was a mess, but whether in the towers or back in the small barracks waiting to go back on duty, it was quiet. Those not manning the post would be trying to sleep, and whether in the towers or in the barracks, I would read, because there was literally nothing else to do except sleep or read. Now, because of this schedule, my reading was always in spurts or interrupted. So I got into the habit of reading the last few pages of a book first. That way, I always had an idea of how the book ended. Well, I found that teaching and sharing information is similar. You see, whenever I do workshops or I'm on stage with an audience, scheduled time is often limited, and audiences usually are eager to get to the meat. Most audiences come into workshops wanting to know at least one of three things. 1, the answer. 2, the solution. And 3, the result. So today, for those of you who have limited or packed schedules, we're going to start with the answer, the solution, and the result. For you looking for the answer, here it is. Be prepared. Be prepared for success. Be prepared for failure. Be prepared for ups. Be prepared for downs. Be prepared for accolades. And be prepared for rejection. You see, being prepared has two sides of every coin or two sides of each argument. And being prepared will always improve your chances and opportunities for success in every experience. So be prepared for both possible outcomes in any situation. Why? Well, there's always the possibility that the results will be in your favor. However, even the best laid plans can go astray, particularly when we're underprepared or overconfident. Being prepared means having a plan that aligns with your expectations, but also a plan built on past experiences of success and failure. You see, contingency plans recognize the need to make quick changes or alterations if plan A goes astray or is derailed. But if you're prepared for both sides of an outcome, no matter the result, there's growth in there someplace. Next, for those seeking solutions, here's my invitation. Join me every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Small Changes, Big Dividends, where I share tips, tools, and steps to make your journey easier and to share solutions that will reduce your stress, struggle, and pressures of daily living. Solutions designed to make your relationships more fulfilling and your daily interactions more successful. And finally, for those seeking results, you can take the takeaways that you hear each week on Small Changes, Big Dividends to fuel your personal, career, or spiritual growth. You'll learn how to acknowledge and use the powers that are already within you for improving relationships and for greater success at home or work. So let's turn now to the back of the book and read the last page. You see, no matter what your future may hold, if you'll do these 5 steps, you can neutralize fear and insecurity and thereby reduce the stress, struggle, and pressures that you encounter in daily life. Why? Because you'll be grounded in the peace that transcends all understanding. So first, invite Jesus Christ into your life. Second, embrace the Spirit of truth that God sends to be with you. Third, engage Christ's Spirit now within you as your counselor, your advocate, your teacher, guide, or instructor. Step 4, emulate, meaning copy or imitate Jesus' examples of responding. And 5, believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. It's this single step that guarantees spiritual life with God through Christ after this mortal life is ended. You see, this is the power of God's unconditional love for each of us. But the onus of action is on us. Troubles and turmoils in this life will eventually pass. But if you've done these 5 steps, you need not be afraid nor worried about what will unfold in the future. You see, events are coming soon to our world that will scare many, literally scare them to death. But you and your family need not fear, because these 5 simple steps that you share with the ones that you love and care about are the words of promise for spiritual grounding and growth from Christ Himself. Have you ever known someone who constantly blames others for their failures, their troubles, their shortcomings or problems? Or someone who makes every imaginable excuse for why events in their life are out of control? Sure, we all have, right? My wife once managed a customer service oriented business, and people would come in to make their payments. And while there, many shared all kinds of situations they were facing in their lives and in their relationships. They would ask her opinion, and sometimes she would politely suggest different options they might consider. And do you know, for every solution she offered, they had a reason why it wouldn't work? Without acknowledging the suggestion, without trying it, without even considering it. They had already decided there's no way it might be a viable or valuable option for them. Each had a reason why there's no way it could even be considered a possibility. They preferred to stay in the dilemma they had created rather than actually employ a solution that might resolve the problem. Are you familiar with this kind of thinking? Have you encountered or heard these kind of excuses? Well, look around. They're everywhere. People in our families, people in our social circles, people at work, even on the commute to work. We see and hear and hear excuses, blame, falsehood, and fake answers. You see, today, many live lives full of false statements, fabrications, or lies. We lie to others, we lie to ourselves. We lie to avoid accusations and recriminations. We lie to avoid responsibility. We lie to get what we want. We lie to avoid what we don't want. We lie to get ahead or to get an edge on our competitors, sometimes even our own team members. We lie at work. We lie in our relationships. You see, we start lying as soon as we understand the concept of right and wrong. And then we embrace fabrications and we invent excuses until they become ours. And as we become more comfortably enveloped within their arms, we start with a teaspoon and graduate to a spade, then to a trowel, and then to a shovel. And then we trade up shovel sizes. Well, today we're going to put that shovel down for 30 minutes because we each possess 3 powers within us that are all ready to be put to use. We're going to talk about those 3 powers right after our commercial break. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media, TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. So what are these 3 powers that we already have within us? They are the power of thought, the power of choice and consequence, and the power of truth. We have them as part of our inner core or inner being automatically when we're born. But if and when you can regain command of these powers, you can reduce the stress, struggle, and conflict in life and relationships, literally at the speed of thought. You see, the power of choice and consequence gives us the ability to avoid adversity. Choice and consequence is an interesting one, and one we should each take seriously, because our lives operate on choices. And it's with the choices and decisions that we often make without thinking, without any real analytic reflection, without even asking ourselves what's in it and what's in this for my best interest, before we jump into action, deciding what the possible consequence may be and how it may affect my life today, tomorrow, and in the future. You see, most of our daily decisions are answered with automatic habitual responses. We respond consciously or subconsciously, focused on the primary goal or thought, what's in it for me? If I decide this way, if I choose this path, what will the outcome be for me? And as a result, many of our decisions using our old pattern behaviors become fallout focused. You see, our choices or decisions become not so much about the choice before us as they are about the result or consequence of that choice. Meaning, how will the outcome benefit or hinder me? Think of it this way: we're offered a choice, but we naturally focus on the outcome, usually an immediate or short term result. We wonder how this outcome will help or hinder my immediate goals, ambitions, and desires. And by doing so, we abandon the power in the choice in pursuit of the outcome. And if our perceived or anticipated result doesn't align with what we expected, we may totally ignore the power that resided in our original choice. Because this "what's in it for me" question is our natural state. It's our natural inclination and our natural desire. It's our human nature, if you will. You see, every choice has two options: an affirmative and a negative or rejection. And it's this spark initiative or pivotal moment where the power of choice resides. From the moment of our imminent choice comes the act, the action, or the response that will ultimately lead to our reward, our consequence, our fallout, or the result. This is why the power resides in the choice, not in the consequence. Sure, we've got to be aware of all possible outcomes and their place on the scale. But most important is to not forget that the power is in the choice. You see, it's recognizing the power in the choice that leads or motivates our decision of how we will act or respond. And because recognition of the power in the choice, we're allowed to put the consequence in its proper position, which is second. Consequence can't dictate our choice if we understand that the power rests in affirming or rejecting that specific choice. Let me give you an example. I go to a party and I drink too much. Now I have three choices of how to get home. Number one, drive home under the influence. Two, hire a cab or an Uber. And three, catch a ride with somebody at the party. So I think about my dilemma. Well, I've driven home successfully before after drinking too much, so I know I can make it home, right? But can I? What are the potential outcomes or consequences if I drive? Well, I may get home, I may be stopped or get a ticket, or I may be involved in an accident. Here's the problem with responding using old pattern behaviors. Every time I do, I'm rolling the dice. And by driving inebriated, I run the risk that the odds of pending negative outcomes that may affect my entire future can very well be the possibility. If you've ever been to Las Vegas, you know they didn't build those hotels and casinos by letting gamblers win. The odds are always with the house. Well, the same holds true in life. You roll the dice against a system designed to test, tempt, and challenge you, up to and beyond your breaking point. Now, the day after the party, life will go on. Whether I'm at home in bed, hungover, in jail, or in the morgue. Life will go on. My future, on the other hand, may or may not. You see, my entire life, my entire future, perhaps even my career, my family, or health hang in the balance. All of these can be compromised by one miscalculation of choice and consequence. Now, to avoid potential adversity, a simple cognition of what's really in my best interest gives me at least two other viable choices to get home safe and sound. This is the power of choice and consequence to avoid adversity. Let me share another example, simple example. Do you think that God exists? Yes or no? That thought, that belief in his being or not is a choice. And from that choice comes actions and responses. Here's another. Do you think your pet, if you have one, or your child, if you have one, can be taught a certain behavior? Your choice of how to answer that question can lead to certain behaviors by you that can develop, hinder, or determine your pet or your child's response to change, response to choice and consequence. Now, before we get too far in the weeds, just realize it's choice, not consequence, that holds the real power. Why? Because choice allows your initial decision. Consequence only allows you to take a bow or clean up the mess afterwards. Perhaps you've listened to a podcast where a guest shares their story about overcoming adversity. Now, these were once known as Horatio Alger stories because each had a theme of perseverance, grit, or gumption by the protagonist, while striving for success rooted in a dream, a goal, or an ambition. Facing adversities, each story had an ultimate change of outcome to the hero or the heroine's state of struggle. But behind the veil of the story's action, there was always a moral or ethical lesson. Perhaps you've heard of Aesop's fables or the Canterbury Tales. We can go all the way back to the ancient philosophers, soothsayers, oracles, and sages to find stories, fables, and tales that entertain, delight, or teach. But at their core, all were morality plays, choice and consequence of morals and ethics. So when you hear a podcast host or guest share their story of how they overcame adversity, what do you think? Now, no doubt these anecdotal tales can be entertaining, but the fact is, each story is the teller's tale, and their circumstances are not necessarily the same as or similar to yours. You see, many of today's podcast guests try to express in 30 or 40 minutes what may have taken years, even decades, to accomplish. That's why the real value is only to the storyteller, not to the listener. Recalling steps to glory and riches or 6 and 7 figure incomes may entertain or leave you with feel good vibes of appreciation for what was endured. But after the episode ends, each listener goes back to their own life. You see, your story is your story, and your challenges are yours. So here's today's key takeaway for this episode. Instead of attempting to overcome adversity, it's infinitely easier altogether to step around the hole of adversity. You see, stepping around the holes is always easier than digging ourselves out. And it's in the actions of avoiding adversity where the power of choice actually exists. You see, we often forget For every choice we make, there is a consequence, large or small, short-term or long-term impact. And every choice contains consequences of possible reward or fallout. So, what do we mean by consequence? Well, everyone knows the word, but what does it truly exude? An immediate desired outcome may be in the forefront of our thinking, so much so that we overlook any possible negative effects. But even more important, we may forget or ignore how our choice can or may affect others. And that's the real key. This often leads to people repeating a cycle that allows jumping into a hole and to start digging. And then to make matters worse, they get a bigger shovel and dig deeper and deeper and deeper until it's a hole of disappointment, despair, damage, even possible danger. And if we remain in that hole of negative behaviors for long enough or too often, our perceived escape mechanisms may even become harmful. They can even become dangerous, even deadly, to us and the ones that we love and care about. You see, many people are faced with a choice or decision, and they only think about the anticipated outcomes they desire. They're laser focused on the goal they want or expect, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, even if a similar choice in the past was costly. They look at this new or next choice with eyes that they only see what they want. And in many cases, the more we want it, the more blind we can become to the possible negative results. And this can be a very tenuous way to live. So again, the easiest solution is to step around holes of adversity by recalling previous choices and their outcomes. We're going to take a pause for our second break. When we come back, we're going to talk about red flags and their power. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Again, the easiest solution is to always step around holes of adversity altogether by recalling previous choices and their outcomes. To see if your thoughts produce red flags lurking in the shadows of a new choice, you need to pay attention. You see, people, like animals, are creatures of habit. And when our behaviors become comfortable through repetition, we can start to experience each within its own comfort zone, even if it's a place of comfortable misery. We want what we want, and oftentimes the more we want it, the less likely we are to recognize the spectrum of other possibilities, good, bad, or ugly. So let red flags be a beacon shining light on your next or new possible or pending choice. This is the advantage of focused pre-thinking. It requires and encourages critical analysis in real time. You see, for many today, this once nuanced and practiced skill has become less acute with the aid of technology. Now, don't get me wrong, the world of technology has opened up information and knowledge previously unknown, previously guarded, or previously cloistered. And technological devices today allow for information to be unleashed and unfettered. But we live in a world, we live in an era, we live in an age where we can literally access any available knowledge on a device held in our hand. But just like that coin, even technologies have two sides. On one side, we have access to the world. On the other side, the world can have access to us. And the question becomes, at what cost? What price is given up when we have interactive isolation by withdrawal from physical presence of others, or by eliminating face-to-face contact and personal interaction. See, many people today rely with total confidence on what they're told, what they're shown, and what they're encouraged to believe as true through technology. And we're encouraged to have total faith in what we see and read, and therefore believe that to be truth. And so information, misinformation, and disinformation may appear to be true on its face. And without regard to look deeper or fact check, we can go down a tube or spiral that's not in our best interest. You see, one element of intelligence that sets humans apart from every other species is our mental ability to think critically and to employ rational thought that can be then shared verbally or in writing. But when our days are filled with only streaming technological devices, we can start to lose that human edge to our critical thinking and analysis skills. And without those thinking and analysis skills, statements of misinformation, or worse, propagandized disinformation, are not in our best interest. Information falsehoods can affect us as individuals, as members of groups, tribes, neighborhoods, communities, and nations, and soon even as world citizens. Because relinquishing critical thinking and analysis skills can blur the focus we need to make good, sound choices that are in our best interest. So remember, recall of previous choices and consequences, along with red flag warnings, should be our first line of defense and our first response guiding any new or next choices. Recall of previous experiences and their consequences ensures options as we face similar challenges. Now, in this week's prophecy segment, we're looking at the prophecies in the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, chapters 37, 38, and 39. Why? Because these three prophecies explain and sum up our world's future. You see, these three chapters, 37, 38, and 39, lay out and explain for us as readers and listeners the three end time events that God has promised the entire world will witness to prove his presence in our world and to validate his relationship with the nation of Israel as his chosen children. Chapter 37 describes the valley of dried bones, or the reconstitution of Israel as a nation state. Chapter 38 describes God's intervention in the coming Ezekiel war conflict between Israel and her enemies. And chapter 39 describes the 7 months of fallout after the Ezekiel war, when the treaty and covenant between Israel and many nations will be orchestrated by the man who will become the Antichrist. It's the actions in these 3 chapters of Ezekiel that are the final 3 events before the start of the 7 years of tribulation. 3 events that God has said the entire world will witness before the conclusion of Israel's 70th week. You see, as a loving parent, God cares for all he has created, including all his children. But that said, he has a special relationship with the nation of Israel. Why? Because it's through them, and specifically through the line of David, within the tribe of Judah, through his Mother Mary, that Jesus of Nazareth was born into our world. Remember from our previous episodes, universal consciousness, as truth and love, being omnipotent, has the power to manifest itself as spirit. And through that spiritual presence, God interacts with the universe of physical matter. You see, God, whether you call him Yahweh, Allah, Brahma, or Christ, is pure truth and love. And therefore, nothing except truth and love can be in its presence. Any part of creation that has been tainted or stained by anything that limits, reduces, or interferes with pure truth and love must be refined, must be made pure again before returning to God's presence. Likewise, God's spiritual interaction with anything outside of himself must be carried out by an identifiable and similarly structured entity. Meaning for us as human beings, another human being must be our conduit, our way back. Meaning our spiritual path of return must be through God's pure spiritual essence. And this is where Christ Jesus comes into the picture, for he is both humanity and spiritual presence. It's Jesus who is our spiritual conduit back to universal consciousness, truth and love, back to God. Jesus of Nazareth, the man, was born with God's spiritual purity, and therefore he became the God-man, or spiritually God in physical man. And just like you and I, Jesus was given free will to choose how he would respond to the people, events, and circumstances that he came into contact with while here on earth. Well, he chose to respond morally and ethically, because morals and ethics are the actions of truth and love. And truth and love are the character and nature of God as the spiritual manifestation of universal consciousness. So while he was here as a human, had Jesus chosen to sin or to be disobedient to God's ways and purposes, he would have ceased to be God's messenger. He would have no longer been God's incarnate spirit for redemption. That is, the spiritual conduit back to spiritual refinement for you and I. But because he refused to bend to the will of his humanity by sinning, meaning being disobedient to God's active spiritual will within him, within his being and within his life, he was able to remain God's purposed path of reconciliation, and therefore is humanity's refining crucible, capable of taking every believer in his divinity from its physical realm back to its spiritual realm. You see, it's through belief in Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, that he becomes the way, the truth, and the life for his believers. This is John 14:6. And it's through our individual and collective belief in Christ Jesus that spiritual redemption and reconciliation is both promised and guaranteed. Remember, Romans 10 tells us, by believing in our heart and confessing with our mouth that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, our spiritual salvation of eternal life is promised. So do this one simple act so that you and your loved ones will live forever in God's presence. We're going to take our last break of the day. When we come back, we'll talk about next week's program. You're watching, listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching, listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Next week's show is going to be our final show before the holiday break, so we can let our engineers have both Christmas and New Year's Day off. We'll be back on January the 8th. But for our closing show for the season, next week we're going to be talking a little about what we can expect as students of prophecy with the second Trump administration taking office January 21st. And then we'll be back on January 22nd to do an analysis of what it means for us as prophetic Christians to watch Trump and his designs unfold. So thanks for joining me again today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we discuss personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share it with them. If today's show has been interesting for you, please give us a rating and review. And to know more about my work, I invite you to visit my website, branchisole.com, or my YouTube channel, Branch Isole. Today's show has been sponsored by Crystal Creek Farm. If you have a business, a product, or a service you'd like to share with the world on Small Changes, Big Dividends, just send your inquiry to the website. You've been watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media, TV and Talk Global Network. Until next week, keep growing and be in the world, not of the world.
What if you could discover a deeper spiritual truth, free from the constraints of organized religion? Introducing the Spirituality Series, a 5-book collection that offers a fresh, honest approach to spirituality. These stories are not about religion, they're about truth. For seekers, searchers, and those who have fallen away from traditional beliefs, this series is a guide to spiritual relationships that transcend doctrine. Explore 5 powerful themes: meaning, purpose, expression, fellowship, and choice. Each book reveals new ways to understand and embrace spirituality in daily life, without the influence of mainstream religion. Whether you're searching for deeper meaning or simply curious about the role of spirit in your life, these books will guide you to a fulfilling spiritual path, one that is grounded in the teachings of Jesus Christ, but free from the limitations of any specific faith. Experience spiritual growth through personal stories, practical insights, and poetic reflections designed to awaken your soul. Start your journey today with the Spirituality Series. Free from religion, full of truth. Get your copy today.
This has been Small Change, Big Dividends. When you're ready for healthier, more successful relationships at home or work, Small Change, Big Dividends is your show. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.